you don't, do you mind if I record this?
That's fine.
Okay, thanks.
Your presentation is right next to us. So we'll be just needing a prompter saying next slide and we'll forward your slides.
Okay.
And then we'll have time for questions in the end.
Sounds good.
And introductions. Stephanie's going to start.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm also in the rhetoric writing program.
Nice to meet you.
I'm also in the program.
Okay.
Hi, Ria. This is Laura. Nice to see you.
Oh, I'm in one of your classes right now. Yes, excited about that.
And I'm Sylvia Hoover, our teacher for 686.
Finally, I meet you.
And you haven't met me, but I'm Nancy Budron, and I also teach in the rhetoric area.
Nice to meet you, Nancy.
Good to meet you.
All right, well, we're ready for you.
Okay, so I have my slides here too. So I shall begin. My topic is an interdisciplinary topic. I wanted to bring in film studies, psychology, as well as environmentalism into my topic because it's something I'm passionate about and have been following this film for a while. So that's why I chose it. And I also believe it's really important to make rhetoric important to other departments and allow students from other walks of life to contribute their ideas as well as gain insights from how to communicate well. And so I'm going to go to the second slide. It says introduction and just has some pictures there. We can see in the picture we're behind the camera, and I want us to think of the possibilities that there are for taking production to the ultimate level. It's not as inaccessible as we might think as it was 10 years ago. Right now, with modern technology, people can even be making movies on their phone. And it's a very vital thing. As you can see, everyone is constantly connected. We've never had a time of such instantaneous information. So I think that, for example, the NAU department changing from rhetoric to media studies is a really important move, and I want to talk about why my project is in line with that. Next slide. So here's the background and outline of my report, and I do have 2 points of focus. One is environmental. Throughout the film, the director discovered that animal agriculture is the biggest cause of environmental degradation, and I'm also focused on how he conveys his message, because I see the filmmaker as a model for the ultimate way that we want to teach rhetoric, and we want to make them ask these questions about multimedia. Who is behind this message? How did they create it? How are other people going to see the same message? Okay, so as I go through, I'll mention my research problem and the conclusions that I came up with and recommendations that I would like to focus on. So next slide, please. This picture was taken by the author of Metanomics, David Simon, in an interview he had after the movie with these 2 guys. On the right is the main actor and the person who designed the project. As he went into asking questions about the situation that he discovered, he found Keegan Kuhn, who has been owning an independent film company for 3 years. So I'm going to talk about the basic storyline behind Cowspiracy. It's interesting when I say the word Cowspiracy, because when I first heard that word, I was like, what is that? That doesn't sound very pleasant. And one of my interviewees, actually, my Amandine, the French one, we both agree that titles are really important. And I think that this title does encapsulate the essence of the film, but at the same time, it leaves a lot out. So I'm just pointing that out. So Kip Anderson began his life as the son of a teacher and a military father with 1 sister, enjoyed nature growing up, and he said that his life had a turning point when he watched the movie by Al Gore on climate change. So from that point on, he became what he called an OCE, obsessive compulsive environmentalist. And I think a lot of us can relate to that. You know, okay, I gotta recycle and try to ride my bike a little bit more, do everything we can, but he felt this sense of hopelessness, that no matter what we do, we can't reach the goal we need to in this project. And a friend of his forwarded him an email from the United Nations 2009 report showing animal agriculture is the biggest source of environmental degradation. And he was shocked, which is exactly the same response that I got from most of my interview participants as well. So it all begins with the curiosity that he takes to the ultimate level by going through a series of interviews. Next slide, please. Here you can see the cast of the movie, all the major environmental organizations around him. He's based in California, so he's very lucky he was able to go to the headquarters, a lot of them. And what was really surprising is many people didn't really want to talk to him about the leading cause of environmental degradation, and they didn't have it on their websites. And that is what is most shocking to viewers. Why would this be? So that is what drove him to further investigate. And there's something inherent, there's an exigency inherent in this movie about wanting to know why. Everyone wants to know why. So that's partly why I chose him as well. Next slide, please. If you haven't seen the movie, it's a combination of cinematography, panning in and panning out on people's faces to kind of empathize with them, but also see them as an object, in conjunction with the very strong narrative storyline, because we're following behind him as if we are with him as his friend or we are him, in conjunction with using what Stanzig would approve of, combining image with text. So he creates a lot of infographics on all these main points of how the environment is sacrificed by animal agriculture, as you can see. So the next few slides I'm just going to go through quickly to give you a sense of what it's like to watch the movie. So imagine that you're being told a story, and interjecting into the story are all of these images with text that show you vital information to his cause. Next slide. So rainforest, and a second on rainforest. Next slide. Species extinction. Because of animal agriculture, the habitat has been taken down. Land use. So he shows how much land it takes for one person to produce enough food for a year to live on a certain kind of diet, totally plant-based to a mixed diet. Next slide. Because of the runoff in the ocean dead zones, a lot of fish are being killed. So this was, by 2048, the oceans will probably be fishless unless we do something. Next slide. Dead zones. Water, next slide. So a third of the world's water is consumed by animal agriculture. And one of the really clever ways that he produces information, next slide. So you can see he puts it into a human scale that people can relate to in their everyday life. Oh, I could not shower for 3 months, or I could not eat this burger. So no guilt trips to anyone who had a burger. But that was one of the things I noticed in my interview, is people's reaction to the movie really depended on how in line they were with that lifestyle. And I think it's important to remain open and recognize that everyone has a different entry point into accessing this information. So just in case you're worried about being judged, that's how it is. So next slide, greenhouse gases is the most controversial statistic, because in the movie they talk about a 50%, and that includes transporting the cattle to the feedlot and changing them into food and marketing it. So we could look at any kind of food item that way. So that is a controversial point, but most of the other stats go in line with my secondary sources as well. Okay, and the final slide with the earth is something that really stuck with me as a student of rhetoric, having studied, 19th century literature and thinking about the past and imagining myself in these places, is that it took until 1812 to reach a population of 1 billion on the planet. So a lot of our mindset is stuck in centuries and centuries of how it's okay to live, but with the Industrial Revolution, boom, another billion pretty much. And then 200 years later, with all of our technology, who can explain why this is? We're at 7 billion people on the planet. So we do have to reconsider the way we live every day. And that's the really hard part to convey to the public, and it involves behavioral change. So on to the next slide, the research findings, mind the gap. So that is the metaphor for my project. My project, I wanted to know, first of all, do the facts line up in the film? Can I find other sources that verify this is true? And I did. And my second part was being very optimistic about behavior change. Oh, we can do this as individuals through multimedia, but the findings show that it's not that simple. It's a very complex problem to look at. Next slide, please. So for my literature review, I took from 3 different departments. I did look into other work in interdisciplinary academia, some with physics and projects that people put together either from a science department perspective or from a rhetoric department perspective, venturing into scientific topics. And the problem is there's not a lot of stuff out there that I found anyway. For the environmental section, the first 2 sources are what I refer to as the Chatham House Studies. It's an independent policy organization in London, think tank basically. And those are the recent resources that I focus on the most in my secondary sources. Followed by some books, authors in the film, and the 2016 just came up this week. It's a computerized vision of what the world would look like if we went in different choices, if we were able to promote this certain kind of diet or this certain kind of diet. So I have a graph on that. And rhetoric and digital media, I chose a lot from Buckingham, who is a staple in media literacy education studies, as you guys know probably. Center for Media Literacy to acknowledge the rhetorical questions behind media. And I found a lot of materials from our class really helpful for me because I wasn't in 563, so it really helped me build my ability to convey all the different parts of what was important about his film. For example, Bold for narrative, Denzin and Dilly for how to interview and also examine how he interviews people, and Stanzik and Wagner for thinking about images in relation to text, and Wagner for how social scientists differ from documentarians or artists in looking at how to create film and who is behind the camera. Roslin was very important because he also unearthed UN studies and brought them to light for educators and students to look at. Next slide, please. So you can see a brief overview of my secondary research findings, but essentially it lines up that there is an information gap that needs to be addressed, and unfortunately meat really is a major cause of climate change. It's not the only one, but it's one that we could use to bring down the global climate to 2 degrees that they had, the goal of the last climate change meeting in Paris last year. So it's the one that offers the most promise, I think, but it's a complex situation. Next slide. So here's from the Chatham House Studies, and following the little red dots, you can see above meat and dairy production there's a gap, which is essentially that it's worse than people think. And it's one of the ones that people underestimate because they just haven't had a lot of exposure to this information. Okay, and next slide, also the Chatham House Studies in the second round, talks about how, excuse me, people's likeliness to take action on an issue is going to be heightened by their awareness of the issue. So awareness is a vital first step. It's not the complete step though. Next slide. This is from the recent study that I just found, so I haven't really explored this in depth, but I found it very interesting that they show on the left are omnivorous diets, projections into the future of how it comes in line with greenhouse gas emissions, so it's a lot more than reducing meat and dairy products, as you can see on the very far right-hand side. Next slide. So this is my exigency kind of boiled right down, is that there's a cycle of inertia. Low public awareness leads to low policy priority, and inaction by government makes it so the information is not being put out there in the central media channels. So even though I hoped to find out that us individuals behind our computers can make all the difference in the world, it has to go to a more systematic level for changes to be cultivated in time to make a vital difference. Governments have to lead, people have to look at how food is subsidized, providing different options for people to make it easier to have behavior change, and so on and so forth. Trusted sources seem to be key to raising awareness because going through central media channels is vital. Next slide. And I don't know how much time you guys had to look at my project website, but it is basically a showcase of the interviews that I did with 15 people. So you can see their smiling little faces there and my website. Please, next slide. Here's some basic information about the interviewees. They are people that I know, and they're generally expats living abroad or some people who are local Koreans as well, and almost all of them are teachers or have been teachers. Okay, next slide. So here's some quotes from the interview. The most common adjective that I got after watching the film was shocking. It was shocking. One person said I wasn't shocked. I knew all that, but everyone else was quite surprised, like I felt when I first watched it. I was just blown away, like, how could I not know this already? Next slide, last slide. So my strategies for future directions, based on suggestions that I gathered from my qualitative data, which is my interviews, I focus mostly on educational strategies, what I can do about this problem. So people suggested things like, for younger learners, growing plants, working with food, taking parts of the movie. If the minimum age for watching this movie is 13, according to guidelines, but maybe some parts of the movie could be watched and have the student break down all the different issues in the movie, or focusing on the different players in the movie and comparing them and doing their own mini projects. I'd like to suggest it as a project-based learning class that could be tailored to different age groups for different purposes. If someone is in the education system or if someone is a university teacher, one of my friends actually did teach this in a university class to EFL learners. So it has so many different possibilities that I want to develop on my website and continue developing. And like I said at the beginning, I think it's a really good example of how we can show interdisciplinary academia in action and invite interesting people into the rhetoric department and maybe even place rhetoric and digital media courses in other departments pertaining to NAU. So I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Ria. You're in Korea right now, is that right?
Yes, it is 7:34 a.m. Friday, so I'm calling from the future.
You're up early.
Yeah.
I had a question on the kind of a contextual question. How do Koreans see environmentalism, and how do you see differences between Korean and U.S. practices?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I didn't go into depth in the Chatham House studies, but one of the things that they do say is any solution has to be contextualized culturally, and they did do a 12-country study, including 12-country study with the survey, followed by a second study with focus groups, and interviews with non-public government officers, and so on and so forth. And what they found was it really has to be tailored to the culture around them. They think that emerging economies hold the most promise for behavior change because Americans, well, I'm Canadian, us Westerners have a very don't take my freedom attitude where we don't just want to coalesce to governmental implementation, whereas China, Brazil might be more open to that. But living in Korea, Korea is a rags to riches economy, and everywhere around me, people are gorging on meat all the time because they're like, we have money, we're going to enjoy this. So it's associated with wealth and progress. But underneath that, one of the authors in the movie that I was talking about, I actually had the opportunity to watch him talk in Korea because he spent time developing his ideas here, Will Tuttle. He said, this is a nation based on peace-loving and appreciating nature, being in tune with the seasons. So I think that it's a complicated question, but some part of the population would be open to it, but the majority of the population is really on a fast track to a different place. So I do think about that, and one of my further goals in my project, I am studying Korean as hard as I can right now, is to try to develop some media, maybe some YouTube videos or something, with this Canadian girl speaking Korean talking about issues, because it might draw some attention. But at the same time, I'm a little scared to stir anything. I don't want to get in trouble over here because, I'm an expat as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent job. We're running out of time, but how long have you been there?
I came in 2002 the first time with the plan to stay for 6 months, and then I realized how easy it is to work and then travel and work and then travel. So I basically became addicted to this lifestyle, and time just flew by.
Wow, you've been there a while.
Yeah.
Well, it's great that you worked on this project. You have some really interesting findings. That it will be good to hear your Korean and see how you impact.
감사합니다. 그렇게 할게요. It's so great to put a face to the name. It's really exciting.
I'm happy we could finally.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, and you'll probably hear from me next week with reviews of all your work.
Okay, great.
All
Have
right.
a wonderful day. Bye-bye. Bye.